Transforming your life with hypnotherapy just got easier with your host, Julie from CoachingHypnosis.net.
Welcome back, dear listener, to Coaching Hypnosis. Yesterday, we unmasked the modern corporate architecture of the psychic mafia to see how generational fraud syndicates use cold reading and isolation to drain multi-million-dollar fortunes. Today, we're leaving the suburban American strip malls behind and taking a massive leap back in time to the final glittering days of the Russian Imperial court. We're looking at the absolute historical blueprint of conversational control. We are analysing a man who didn't just swindle a wealthy mark, he embedded himself so deeply into the psychology of the ruling dynasty that his personal influence actively accelerated the collapse of an empire. Today, we break down the clinical reality of Grigori Rasputin. Now, if you open any basic history textbook or watch mainstream documentary, Rasputin is inevitably wrapped in the campy, sensationalized language of the occult. They call him the mad monk, the holy sorcerer, possessing literal demonic powers, or mystical faith healer who could magically stop blood from flowing through sheer spiritual projection. But let's look past the dramatic folklore and be completely real as strategic operators. Rasputin wasn't a wizard, my friends. He didn't have a direct hotline to the divine. What he did have was an extraordinary instinctual mastery of conversational hypnosis, somatic pacing, and sensory fixation. When you study historical accounts of his behavior, what looks like supernatural healing was actually a highly effective deployment of clinical pacing. He stepped into a palace, paralyzed by acute crisis, bypassed the critical faculty of the Tsarina, and used deep relaxation protocols to alter the biology of a hemophiliac child. Today, we strip away the religious myth to decode the cold, neurolinguistic mechanics of the history's most powerful royal court infiltration. To understand how a peasant from a remote Siberian village managed to dictate imperial policy, you have to look at the severe psychological vulnerability of his targets. Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra were carrying an unimaginable weight. Their only son and heir to the throne, Alexei, suffered from hemophilia. In the early 1900s, a minor bump or bruise meant agonizing internal bleeding that doctors were entirely powerless to stop. The imperial household was perpetually trapped in a state of chronic, high-velocity survival panic. Their collective default network was completely shattered by stress. Rasputin entered this high-pressure environment with one specific devastating advantage. He was an absolute master of the somatic pattern interrupt. When called to the bedside of the bleeding young prince, Rasputin didn't join in the panic. While royal physicians hovered over the boy frantically, unintentionally spiking the child's heart rate and blood pressure through their own terror, Rasputin walked in and completely changed the atmospheric cadence of the room. He would lean directly over the bed and lock his famously piercing, wide, unblinking eyes onto the boy. This was classic visual sensory fixation, starving the child's mind of the surrounding chaos. Then he would deploy a calculated 3-step clinical protocol. Phase 1, high-stress somatic pacing. Enter an environment paralyzed by survival panic, completely ignoring the surrounding chaos to establish an immediate, dominant anchor of absolute calm. Phase 2, direct vocal sensory fixation. Lock onto the subject's gaze with unblinking eye contact while delivering a slow, low-frequency, rhythmic monologue to force the nervous system to settle. Phase 3, the parasympathetic command. Implant authoritative, reassuring scripts directly into the unburdened mind. lowering heart rate and blood pressure to achieve an organic medical shift. Rasputin would speak in a low, slow rhythmic vocal drone, reciting biblical passages or telling comforting folk stories. He would gently stroke the boy's forehead, establishing a soothing physical touch anchor. In clinical terms, Rasputin was down-regulating the child's sympathetic nervous system, the flight or fight response, and triggering a profound parasympathetic relaxation response. When a hemophiliac drops into a deep, hypnotic trance state, their heart rate slows, their vascular constriction changes, and their blood pressure plummets. And what happens when blood pressure drops? The rate of internal bleeding decreases drastically, allowing the body's natural, limited clotting factors to finally close the wound. Let's look at the absolute sarcastic absurdity of how the royal court and historical biographers process this entirely mechanical biological shift. You have the Tsarina, a highly educated woman who watches this unwashed, wild-eyed peasant sit by her dying son, talk in a slow voice and essentially calm the kid down until the bleeding stops. And instead of saying, "Yep, look at the profound medical utility of deep physical relaxation," she immediately proclaims, "This man is a literal saint sent by God to guide our political appointments." It is the absolute peak of elite cognitive engineering. Rasputin realized that because he could control the physical biology of the prince, he held the entire psychological architecture of the Tsarina in his hands. He used that leverage to isolate her from her advisors, enforce absolute secrecy over their interactions, and systemically dictate the firing and hiring of government ministers based on who flattered his ego. He genuinely convinced the royal family that his presence was the only thing keeping their dynasty alive, turning a simple tool of somatic pacing into an unsatiable fortress of political corruption. As professional strategists and modern hypnotists, we must strip the religious theatre away from the Rasputin myth and analyse the precise neurolinguistic levers he manipulated. He showed the world exactly how an extinctual practitioner can achieve total institutional capture by weaponizing three specific mechanisms. The contrast induction. Hypnotic suggestibility increases exponentially when an operator provides a sudden, massive contrast to the environment. In a palace filled with whispering courtiers and terrified panic doctors, Rasputin's booming, unshakable confidence and slow, grounded cadence functioned as a profound psychological life raft. The subconscious mind will automatically surrender its critical faculty to whoever offers the absolute baseline of safety during a crisis. The downregulation of physical trauma. Rasputin proved that the mind and body operate on a single unified loop. By using deep hypnotic conditioning to calm the prince's amygdala, he directly altered the child's internal blood flow. This wasn't supernatural healing. It was an advanced demonstration of how altering a psychological state can radically change an immediate physical symptom. The authority exploitation loop. Rasputin understood that his rustic, unpolished background wasn't a liability, it was an asset. By leaning into his persona as a holy peasant, he bypassed the royal family's typical social fitters. They expected a sophisticated courtier to lie to them, but they assumed an uneducated holy man could only speak the raw truth, leaving their critical gatekeeper completely disarmed. Grigori Rasputin's profound manipulation of the Romanovs ultimately led to his infamous assassination by the desperate nobles in 1916, but the psychological damage he inflicted had already broken the foundation of the state. He proved to the world that while the subconscious mind is a beautiful engine for physical healing and emotional stabilization, if an operator leverages that clinical relief to build an unsatiable, codependent God complex, they can completely dismantle the execution of an entire leadership structure. The profound, lingering lesson of the Rasputin case is a visceral reminder that your strategic composure is your most sacred asset, and the second you allow external voice, a charismatic guru or high-stakes crisis to make you completely dependent on them for your own sense of safety or reality, you are surrendering your executive power. An ethical coach, consultant, or clinical hypnotist will always use trance to return the authority to you, strengthening your internal compass, grounding your nervous system in your present stability, and making you the absolute independent ruler of your own life and business. True, unshakable leadership is about building your own self-esteem, knowing how to slow down your execution, calm your own nervous system during a crisis, and lead from an uncompromised, independent mind. If you've realized that you are navigating the heavy, chaotic noise of high-performance pressure by relying on external validations, letting market anxieties, toxic industry voices, or sudden crisis throw your nervous system into a state of reactive overload, where you are looking for a savior instead of trusting your own execution, it is time to step out of the fog and reclaim your strategic composure. If you're ready to clear that cognitive noise, stabilize your execution, and lead your business with a sharp, sovereign, and completely unburdened mind, I invite you to book your free 40-minute clarity call. Together, we will dismantle the external noise, ground your nervous system in absolute reality, and install a powerful, unshakable subconscious identity focused entirely on your true present sovereign authority. Remember, aligned subconscious plus healed history equals unshakable leadership. Thank you for listening. Align your mind. Visualize your future. Grow your business. Mindfully yours, Julie.